Okay, everybody, thank you all so much for coming. My name is Morgan. I use she and they pronouns. I'm going to be your moderator today. I have a quick little script to read you all before we get started, and then I'll hand it over. So, hello, and thank you for taking part in 2021's Diversity Building Community. Before we begin, I'd like to note that we are recording each diversity session so we can make them accessible after the event is over. Please keep this in mind as you engage in this space, as your questions and comments will be included on the recording. DiverseU is a celebration of diversity, and I'm sure we're all eager to find out what can be learned by attending these sessions. First few ground rules. This important student-led program creates learning spaces where people from various disciplines can facilitate discussions in an engaging academic setting. DiverseU is an opportunity to engage in civil discourse and dialogue through listening and learning. The ground rules are in place to assist our presenters in maintaining dignity and respect in those spaces. So here are a few guidelines for participating in the discussion and how we can better serve and respect the learning experience for everyone involved. Guideline 1. Communicate direct personal experience and not secondhand experience. In doing so, we rely on I statements like I was affected in an incident where, and I know in my own life I experienced. Guideline 2. Speak for yourself, not as a representative of any group or any other person. Along with the same idea, do not single anyone out to be an expert in order to speak on behalf of any group. Guideline 3. If you do wish to reference studies outside of your own experience, we invite you to cite academic studies collected from the various academic journals and databases available from the Mansfield Library. Guideline 4, be respectful and courteous throughout each presentation, whether you agree with the presenter or not. Our central mission here is civil discourse. Be mindful of the amount of space you're taking up and allow others to share in the dialogue. Guideline 5, be mindful that many of the presenters are in a place of vulnerability due to the personal nature of each topic. As an institute of higher learning, we depend on the student conduct code to ensure each presenter is treated with dignity and respect. Guideline 6, active listening is more than hearing. It is expressed in our presence in the room. Based on this factor, we ask that while in the learning space, you silence your phone. If you do need to text or talk on the phone, we ask that you respectfully step outside of the meeting space to send those communications. There you have it, 6 relatively simple guidelines and expectations for conduct in these spaces. These rules apply to individuals and groups that are not students, and we will enforce them should poor conduct occur from any person. Thank you for coming, and I'll now turn it over to our awesome presenter.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Should I continue? What was that? Can we close the door?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, of course. Or not. I have to move it over. We're on the Zoom page, is that why?
Oh, yeah, it should be on that one.
I'm just trying to move the slide over, but it's not letting me. I'm just gonna go ahead and do some introduction while that's going on. But my name is Kahanaakealohanokawimakaokalani. I'm a poetry student here and I'm a storyteller. And one thing that I like to do at the beginning of our presentations is chat, something that I grew up doing at the start of classes. So I want to take a teaching moment, I think. And this is a chant called Hawai'i. It's a chant of entry into a living space. And when I was in elementary school, we went to Hawai'i studies class once a week. We would get there as a group of like tiny 4 foot tall little things. Take off our shoes and we do this chant together. And what it did is it taught me to be aware of wisdom that was outside myself, that was present in my classmates, in my teachers, and in people who had come before. And so, taking off my shoes because I think it's important for me to remember that when I teach, when I'm in front of people, I'm coming as my most vulnerable self. And if you look at it another way, it's also my most civilized self. So here I am, barefoot in the presentation. And this is a chant that gets repeated 3 times generally. I'll demonstrate the first time. Hawaiian is a phonetic language, so don't be afraid to try pronouncing it. And the second, it also goes, there are 2 tones in this chant. It starts from the lower one, goes to the higher one, and switches back to the lower one at each line. So I'll demonstrate it once and we'll repeat it. And if you want to join me, we'll walk. It goes like this. E mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e au, o nā mele. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e au, o nā mele. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai, kai ke mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e au, o nā mele. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai e. Grant us knowledge from above, the knowledge hidden in the chants. Grant us, grant us, grant us. We should be getting ready. So today I'm going to be reading from a short story called Waimaka, which I wrote kind of before I found out I was a poet. It's published by Bamboo Ridge Press, which is a literary journal of Hawaii literature and the arts. If you're interested in that kind of work, then they're a great place to start. I wrote this story from and to and into a particular culture, and in the context of this DiverseU conference, I want to do the work today of inviting you into that story world. So in order to do that, I'm going to first spend a few minutes talking about Hawaii, which is where I'm from. I'm from Oahu, in central Oahu. In the Hawaiian culture, storytelling falls under the blanket term mo'olelo. The thing that's crucial to understand about Hawaiian storytelling is that it develops in such close relationship with hula as a dance and as a religious community practice that in Hawaiian culture, you can't use your body and not be telling some kind of story. So even if you're apart from the halau or the people that you're dancing with, the way that you use your body is legible. The body of the dancer is legible as a literature person might say, or as a performance kind of theorist might say. So in hula, every motion corresponds to the text. Hula is a dance that's where the motions correspond to something that's being chanted or sung. And so in life, every movement potentially can respond to the belief. So mo'olelo produced shared language, mythology, and memory, both within and without the hula context itself. The chant is a good example of that. It was part of like the classroom ritual that I participated in, and over time, that taught me something about what it was like to live in community. In my own life, mo'olelo came alive for me when I joined my high school's Outrigger Canoeing paddling team. The main character of the story I'm going to read is impacted by the Outrigger Canoe paddling community in a very particular way, which will become more clear as I read from the story. So to set you up for the hearing of this, I kind of want to talk technically about canoes, just a little bit, get the basic comprehension of terminology out of the way, not out of the way, but to incorporate that into our experience of the text. So how many of you have, okay, now you've seen one, but how have you been, have any of you been in an outrigger canoe before? Yeah, so outrigger canoe is like, there's the main canoe, and then there's, you can't see it from this side, but it's connected to a baby canoe, so the thing that helps it stay balanced and upright when there are waves rolling underneath it. So I did regatta in high school, which is racing. There's another whole other aspect to canoe paddling that I provided some resources for if you're interested in that, but like Hawaiian voyaging and wayfinding. So they would just go and use the stars to navigate on these like massive double hull canoes. But what I did was just racing. So like sprinting happens in like, you can see flags here. You would do race turns around these flags. So this is what I grew up doing. What I want to say about this. You can kind of see how this works here. There are 6 people in a boat. We're all lined up in a row. The first and second seats are the ones who set the pace of the paddling. The first person is set up with their paddle on one side, and then the second person has it on the other side. So everyone who's paddling on this side behind me can see when I'm planting my blade in the water and when I'm pulling it out, when I'm reaching, when I'm going down, when I'm pulling, and when I'm pulling back out. So the whole goal of paddling in a canoe is sort of to move as an organism. We talk a lot in coaching about what it's like to be, to be keeping our head in our own boats. One reason that I thrived in canoe paddling is because I'm not particularly competitive. So the fact that my job was to focus on my team, and there was the steers person's job to focus on the other boats was a really great. I could just learn to be part of this sort of family that was my racing crew. So very cool. So I wanted to tie that idea of paddling as an organism, sort of, back to the idea of Hawaiian storytelling and mo'olelo. The word mo'olelo is a portmanteau. I'm just going to show you. Oh, see, you can see the outrigger on this side. There are 6 seats, 1, 2. We wouldn't have sails. That's craziness. I'm just remembering things about paddling that I'm really nostalgic for it. Our coaches used to sit on these, their legs in the boat, and just sit on these spars and just like talk to us while we're out on the water. Okay, so the word mo'olelo, I got distracted. The word mo'olelo is a portmanteau combination of the words mo'o meaning spine or vertebrae, and olelo, which is the word for language or words. Mo'o, spine, olelo, words, storytelling. So you have a diagram in front of you. Who can tell me which part of the canoe is the mo'o? It's labeled. Yes, so this part on the outside, the splashboard. There's also a part called the kumo'o, but really they're the same like unit. It's just the vessel part of the boat where all the people sit. And so when I find that out, that linguistic like vocabulary connection between the word mo'olelo and mo'o, the vessel of the boat, my poetry mind just like explodes all over the place. Okay, so like what is it like to think of a spine, like a boat being a spine, and all 6 people in the boat being a vertebra of the spine, moving together, and they kind of create the mobility and the power behind what is bringing the entire boat forward. Then I think about my own spine, the mo'o of my body or the canoe of my body, and what make up the vertebrae, and what I think of as my ancestors, and what ideas and stories and people move me through this world, even if I'm bodily apart from them. They're in my spine, or in the canoe of my body. It sounds really cheesy when I say it out loud, but hopefully that helps you kind of picture what it was like to be part of this power. So the other aspect of this, though, is that growing up in the islands, I never really fit the mold of what it meant to be a Hawaii local. I wasn't incredibly outdoorsy. I didn't have a strong Hawaiian pidgin accent. That's kind of the Creole that emerged in the plantation era times. There are also resources on that. I just want to like post some questions. We can talk about some of these things in detail afterward if you would like. But I didn't sound like a local. I speak standard English, quite unlike my parents. Although I'm highly receptive of that language. And paddling is a sport that draws people who perform or present or exhibit Hawaii local identity in this particular way. That was my experience in high school. So the story that I want to read was me trying to grapple with this experience of being a non-Kanaka or non-native person, but still a Hawaii local who was born and raised in the islands, and what it means to be like a child of the land. We say kama'aina, but still descended from an immigrant or settler colonial community. So that's a very kind of fraught position for me to be writing about. It's also brought a lot of depth and empathy into my experience. And when I was 17, who knew I'd be writing about it? Like, these are still the things that I'm writing about. I still like the story, even though it wasn't necessarily ready to be published. And it just represents the starting point of all the work that I'm doing now in my MFA program and the writing that I hope to do after I graduate too. So I think that's the setup that I'll do. Are there any questions? Okay, great. I'm just gonna make room. The story is called Waimaka. Waimaka means, literally means eye water. Wai means water, Maka means eyes. The main character's name is Maka. This story was an exercise in tandem narrative, so there are parts in the present of the story and it's also the past that are woven together kind of in a cross-cutting sort of way. I'm mostly going to be reading from the present of the story. Since I won't be reading the whole thing, some setup there is that the main character's mother has died and has stated in her will that she wants Maka to bring her ashes to the channel, which is the place that the mother was going to race, but when she passed away wasn't able to ever make it to the channel. So she asks in her will for her daughter to bring her ashes to the channel. The problem is that Maka isn't a paddler. So she's wrestling with the idea that she has to go through some pretty intense personal length to make this happen in her family. Y'all shut up now. For the first however long, I would love if you close your eyes so you can picture yourself with this character, with her boat, sun is setting. This is Waimaka. The sun was beginning to set by the time Maka had managed to bring everything down to shore. The hull, the outrigger, and both wooden spars, the rig ropes, the paddle, and steering blade. Lastly, arms fatigued, she set the salt urn down on the sand. The canoe looked like a carcass, nothing like Manu, the bird, the name her father painted on its bow. In front of her, the entire bay swayed with warm winds and the horizon shone. She greeted the sight with deep breaths and began her work. Open your eyes, everyone. After starting the rig, Maka picked up the first spar and pinned it across the gunnel with her knee and wrapped it to the hull with a thick strap of rubber. She yanked on the ropes till they groaned and she secured. And then she threaded the ropes over, through, across, under, switch, over, through, across, under. She knew she should have brought more rubber or ratchet straps. The finished rig would be loose and uneven without the extra hands and body weight to hold the finished process taut. Kumu taught them that the rig was a job for two people. Kumu was right about a lot of things. She'd been her mother after all. Hands working, Maka recalled the day her mother asked her whether she was going to join the high school paddling team. Maka hadn't answered right away. That night when she looked in the mirror, she thought of dyeing her hair blonde, her blonde hair to dark brown, or cutting it short, anything to hide the fact that she looked nothing like her mother. But she also had her father's pale skin, slim frame, standard English accent. She would be marked as an outsider, never fit in. But Kumu had asked, and she joined the team that fall. This is my daughter, Maka, said Kumu. She'll be paddling with varsity starting today. Maka immediately felt sick. Her new teammates stood around her like a gigantic eye. She didn't hear them with her own ears, but she knew what their whispers were. Pauli, who does she think she is? They proceeded to make it clear that not even being the coach's daughter would earn her any sympathy. Seat 5, coach, seat 5, they jeered. The fifth seat in the canoe was second from the back, in front of the steersman, reserved for those who needed the most coaching and had least strength. Maka felt a glimmer of hope when her mother decided to start training her as a steerswoman. Steering would mean she could see everything, and at the same time, not be seen. She could stay out of everyone's way and yet have all the control. But of course, the special attention made things distinctly worse. And she turned out to be a wretched steer. It was supposed to be simple. Poke left, the boat goes left. Poke right, the boat goes right. But even on the stillest, flattest days, she could barely manage to keep the nose straight. The boat fought her, turning opposite of her strokes and even refusing to turn at all. Her crew could bring their part of her race turn perfectly, and she would still lose control of it before the turn was complete. She would run the outrigger over the turn flags and scrimmages, call changes on the wrong stroke, keep her blade buried too long, too short, too deep, too shallow. Maka would lean over the gunwale and wet her face as she reached shore, so that no one would see her crying. Her mother had remained on her side all the while. She would take the spear spar during practice, as the assistant coaches often did, and comfort Maka with simple shifts in her expression. Still, her teammates' backs mocked her always. They'd break Regatta's #1 rule, to never look backward, just to cast disdainful looks at her over their shoulders. Maka requested to sit in 5 after all. She wouldn't bother anyone, and no one would bother her. How come you don't like to steer? Her mother had asked her in reply. No, and no one else likes me to steer either. You just started learning, baby. I don't like it. The lights went out in her mother's eyes. How come? Maka thought to take it back, to lie, but what good would it have done anyone? All she did was use up a steering blade that someone else deserved, that someone else wanted more than she ever would. Everyone just looks at me, she barely managed to say, and she said it, realizing that sitting 5 wouldn't make any difference. She didn't know if anything would. Her mother took her hands then. You don't think it's worth it, you don't have to stay on the team. I'm sorry for forcing you. Maka looked at the way her hands crumpled in her mother's, broad and sturdy, wetted with experience. She tore her own away in disgust. So be it. She never wanted to be near a canoe again. One day, her mother uncovered her blade, left for practice, and didn't come back. Instead, she and her father received a phone call. It was an open ocean practice, miles from shore, and her mother had suffered a severe heart attack. The emergency radios were found out to be out of working order, and by the time the canoe reached shore, there was nothing left to be done. Her mother would never cross the channel. Her mother would never steer a canoe again. And all those things Maka should have said to her, the canoe, burst out in wails and tears with the weight of all her years. The funeral was full of people Maka had never seen before, and even people that no one in her entire family had ever seen before. This woman's daughter was once her mother's apprentice, that elderly man the canoe on her first canoe club. One woman who had taken turns steering with her mother on a 4-boat's first voyage came up to her and asked her who she was. Maka almost bit back, but the woman lifted a crooked finger and smiled. Ah, you're her daughter, aren't you? Look at those eyes. When both spars were rigged to the hull of the outrigger, Maka lay back to rest on the sand with her arms spread wide. Her chest heaved and her palms burned. How long had the rig taken her? The top layer of sand was already cool. An hour? She didn't have a lot of time, but the light and tide promised by the full moon would buy her just enough. Once she crossed the bar and met the channel, she would be safe. She could wait all night for the next high tide if she needed to. A single ghost crab was scuttling about, just close enough to Maka's head for her to hear. Its sound reminded her of the summer nights she collected them with her mother in small plastic sand pails. When the pails were full, they would release them all at once. And she loved how her legs pricked and tickled her palms, She would delight in watching them disappear into the sand, the waves, the dark, as the moonlight slipped off their backs. But now, alone with the canoe, the ghost crabs and the dark didn't seem so inviting. Maka found tears in her eyes. She wiped them away with her forearm. She gripped the spar and drove it forward with all her weight. The hull scraped and scraped over the sand, then lifted. Her arms faltered when she hoisted herself in, but she made it to her seat, aft. Manu bobbed and drifted with her movements, almost as if she were stretching out her wings. Maka held her paddle at the handle near the base and steadied the blade at the end of the water line. Okay. She buried, ripped through the water, recover on return, reach out and bury, rip, recover, reach. The nose lifted and fell. The hull skipped forward and gained speed. 8 strokes on the left, 8 on the right. Maka set her pace to her heartbeat. The shakiness left her limbs. Pull with your back, pull parallel to the boat. The tranquil sound of the waves climbing ashore flooded her with memories of regatta. Even though she'd never raced, it was an unforgettable sight. Bright immense rows of paddlers, tense 6-man canoes, 18 lane flags wobbling on their buoys. Keep your body aligned, keep your top arm straight. Maka brought the canoe about 5 boat lengths from shore before letting it run. She still wasn't sure she could do this. She might have been wrong about the wind, and as soon as she left the bay, it would flip her outrigger over. She could miss the high tide and get stuck behind the bar. Maka picked up her mother's steering blade. There was no comforting sensation. The wood was cold and lifeless, and the light was too dim for her to see the face. She put the steering blade back under the seat. She felt foolish. Of course, there was no old magic or charm, fairy dust on the blade. The water at the entrance of the channel was unpredictable tonight, uneven and sporadic. The closer she came to the bar, the higher the waters rose around her, and the longer the canoe would lurch on the crests. She buried her blade over and over, but she could no longer see how far she was moving. Darkness was closing over the boat like a dome. The sun was gone, her nerve was dissolving, and twice she stalled her blade on one side, tempted to turn the boat back toward shore. She was scared. She couldn't see. Then her mother's voice, "I'm sorry for forcing you." Maka made one more vigorous stroke and let the boat run, leaning onto the rear spar to hold the outrigger down on the water. "You didn't force me. You aren't forcing me. I'm taking you to the channel." Where is the boat drifting? Left. Where are the waves breaking? 20 yards. The shore? The sandbar? Okay. With a loud cry, Maka buried her paddle once more. And the rest is issue 113. Thank you for listening. I would love to have any kind of conversation, anything that was interesting to you or that you have questions about, anything that troubles you. What's on your minds? Yes.
Just interested in the construction materials that are made, the canoes are made from, and if there's any sort of ritual or history around how they're built.
Yes, of course. So typical racing canoes are made of fiberglass because they're lighter than wood, obviously. There are even some parameters on how much fiberglass or how light a boat can be, just because they move faster depending on how, and so it can become unfair. So fiberglass, traditionally, they were carved out of koa wood. So there's a lot of myth and Hawaiian legends and tradition around how a tree is chosen to be felled and hollowed out into a canoe. It has to do with like dreams and ancestors speaking to people. So I'd encourage you to look at that history too. I'm not an expert in that, but there is a lot that goes into that. And one cool thing is there are some races that are specifically koa boat races. Like even though they're heavier and funkier, they choose to like everyone will paddle in the koa canoes because it's part of tradition. Yeah, some fun facts. Thanks. There are other questions, and that's all I have.
What do you miss most about your Montana?
So I'm new to Montana. I moved here this summer. Before that, I was living in Spokane, though. So I've spent some time kind of landlocked. In reality, I only paddled for a couple of years, but in that time, I developed a really, really sweet relationship with the water. Someone asked me once, what is a place that you constantly return to, like whether that's like physically or in your spirit, in your mind? And my answer to that was the va'a, like being here. This is me, up here. All of my metaphors come out of the imagery of the Pacific Ocean from its center, its heart. So there's a particular way that I hear like the PNW talk about water. So different because even if it's the same ocean, all the temperature, the smells, the way the waves sound, the temperature of the water, it's just, it makes for a different writing experience. So that's one thing I miss most. Sometimes I miss the water and being near the water more than I miss like my own family, which I think my mom is on the same phone. So she gets it though. So thank you for that question. Yes. Yes, good catch. So her mom is Native Hawaiian. She is the assistant coach of this paddling team. Her father has some speaking roles elsewhere in the story, but he's white. I don't know if you had a specific follow-up question to that. Or, yeah, I mean, I could talk forever about like the experience of being mixed heritage. I myself am full Filipino, so this isn't an experience that I wrestle with directly, or is part of my actual heritage. But I can speak to like being an immigrant. I'm a third generation immigrant. My grandparents on both sides are from the Philippines. But because the third generation immigrant experience is often described in this way, where we look the part, we can look the part, but we have no connection really to the language or to ancestral land. That's a very prominent part of my way of navigating the world. And I'm also not Native Hawaiian, even though that's like my ancestral land, if you want to put it that way. What does it mean for me to not be Hawaiian? For all of my language, like I think about the word ho'olelo a lot. I think about all these other, like I'm also familiar with the vocabulary, with the classroom, like culture. We did May Day, hula dancing together like every year. But I'm not Hawaiian, so that's hard for me. I think the most interesting conversation I had once was with my friend Samantha. She's from California, but she has since moving to Hawaii, become very involved in Hawaiian activism and in land rights, all these things. And she says, well, we might not have Hawaiian blood, but we have Hawaiian breath. And so what is our responsibility to our community in that sense? You know, so for me, thinking about race, or like thinking about not being something or being something in these racial terms kind of is too quick to accept the world as racism, racialization has created it. So I tend to think of things more in terms of heritage and what my body and my mind have collected as I move to the world in authentic ways, or try to. So that's what I'm thinking of. I know you didn't ask me that.
No, I love you.
I was not quite at all, but I feel really when I talk, I feel like a Filipino native person, so I feel very disconnected from that. But also having grown up with swimming pool when I was a child, I feel like something that's never been in my life. And I feel like that there has been a lot of this in my upbringing, the type of culture that was like
Yes, absolutely. And yeah.
It's really good to be able to
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like people of the Pacific Islander diaspora are like everywhere. But we're all experiencing this in this one way. I tend to think that diaspora has its own place. I don't know if that's an essay I have to write still. Yes. And like maybe this is another thread of this is like neither of my parents really school people. They both went to school, but me and my brother are the first to go away and be like in this like university setting. So the longer I spend in school, the more ideological differences I have with my family. Also, the more linguistic differences I have with my family. Am I becoming less Filipino or like less Hawaii local is a question that I have. Because who's defining that in the first place? Like maybe being Hawaii local is still just me standing here, but that's not enough for some people, and I question that judgment there. So, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Are there any other questions? We're talking about race now. I love talking about race. Yeah, if you want to, but
there's like this term Ferguson-Steger.
what's that?
That's the term Ferguson-Steger.
Okay.
And it's like basically native record of the city for like their generation. And I feel like I'm not a historical person, but I grew up in migration, but I know that a lot of my friends who grow up in like more like we grow up like in rural or like closer to regions where there's like a Walmart and like less like rural. I feel like they like really struggle, or some of my friends have told me that they really struggle with like not being Indian enough, or like knowing that like they're needed in this space, but like not in your own space.
Yeah. Yeah, but that makes me think of like even the experience of delivering presentations like this one, where I like maybe expected my audience to be predominantly white, but I was wrong. And so it was structured in this way, where I'm presenting to people that I know I'm browner than. But if I were presenting, I would be afraid to show this to like a room full of Hawaiian scholars, you know? So like the not being enough depends on who else is surrounding me. I think that's what you're getting at. Yeah, thank you. Also enoughness. Oh, is there a question? Yeah.
I was just I'm kind of like feeling like not enough, but also knowing that a lot of that was done and family guy influence. I feel like part of it is like like there's this thing we are there's a lot of street because we are like still here, we are like away for people back home. But I feel like there's still like we still have to like play with animals actually and like never being enough or anything. Well, I don't think like I can't say that I struggle with it this much, but I just like I know that like I have family that like they grew up like not feeling like they were like indigenous enough and but like still come on to the parts of them like, with their culture that they could feel comfortable in. Like I don't remember if you like didn't grow up like through traditional aspects of my life, but like how out of their dance the whole life really stayed. That then knowing that
there. Other than that, no more. Yes, and grasping onto those aspects of culture is really empowering and beautiful. It also it's problematic that my ethnicity isn't performance, and it depends on like perception of how well I'm able to perform my ethnicity. Whereas I tend to think of it as like my ethnicity is just how I interact with people. It doesn't necessarily have to do with being Filipino, though sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just about like me wanting to fit in a university culture, or to fit in with paddlers, or that kind of thing. A lot of my research also is in like, what the heck is blood quantum? So what? I see lots of nods. So like this is something that lots of people have thought about before. But like, okay, someone's 25%, which 25%? Like my arm, like brain cells. Like I'm 100% or more of all of my identities. And why can't I freely move through the world to know like from a place of security that I can do these things? And I think that's what it would look like to like actively like train my mind out of what like racialization is trying to work with. Steps like that all the time. Stop now. Anything else? Any burning questions or just comments? I like comments.
What's the other book?
It's a short story. It was published in edition of Mountain Ridge Press. They're a literary magazine that publishes a few issues every year. Yeah, I encourage you to visit this. They publish beautiful work, but it's also like very place based. So I think that's something that's becoming more important to writers now. But yeah, I like this journal. No, go ahead.
Have you found a place here where you connect with them?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that. And it's great because I could say no, right? Yeah. I think it has. So I'm in the MFA program here. I'm studying poetry. I have to be careful because some of my colleagues are sitting right behind me. By one definition, I'm the only person of color in the workshop. And so sometimes I'll bring a poem that's like coming out of my lived experience, and I get questions that are Googleable. That's frustrating, right? So I also don't want to be an educator to my classmates, to be like just to take on that role all the time. I want to learn as well. So that's one thing that's hard. I think that I have grace for that because there's sweet people who like love on my work when I give it to them. And so that's to say that the community that I'm most frustrated with is also the one that I feel like I most belong to. So but I've also only been here for like, it's been 3 months, maybe less than that. So I'm new to the city too. I'm like learning to be like the lands to participate in what it's like to actually live in this area of the country. I also come with, my background is in Christian theology. So I think a lot about spirituality and how things like Hawaiian storytelling tie into that, how they inform my faith practice, how they inform my writing. So I found little pockets of spiritual community too that like really feeds into the rest of my life.
I thought it was really awesome how you incorporate spiritual and body relations in your language, especially in the area that hasn't that so much, and like it's English, like super valuable. It's a really beautiful way to like expose people that are not cheesy at all. You said it's cheesy earlier.
Yes, I think of it in terms of embodied storytelling. So the way that we use our bodies in any context is important. think about it as like even in racial justice work, what it's like for me to stand up and read my story, the ways that I can be telling my story with my shoulders. I hunt over like this, but this is the story I want to tell. Is that I'm really glad to be here with you. Not that I'm closed off, but all of that comes to mind when I'm able to think of the way that I walk as storytelling too. But, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's a lot of what I think about. Okay, well, we have only 4 minutes left, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation.